Welcome, everyone, to this week's RAM Chat from the Renew America movement. My name is Joel Searby. I'm the National Political Director here at Renew America, and we are thrilled today to be joined by Lieutenant Governor Geoff Duncan from Georgia. We're going to be talking about his incredible new book, GOP 2.0, and of course, we have our national spokeswoman, Mariana Mancuso, joining us to fire away the zinger questions. We are looking forward to a great conversation, and I'm going to just kick it off a little bit in setting up Mariana's intro here. As I read this book, Geoff, I was so enthralled with the first chapter, telling your story of what happened to you and to your family. You may or may not know this, that we share a faith background. We share the idea that we've stood up against some pretty tough forces and been threatened for that. In 2016, I had my life threatened a couple of different times, a few times very credibly, and for what I was trying to do, just standing up for truth. And you've been through some of those same stories. You know, we're a political organization, and a lot of times we talk about policy and elections on this podcast, but we're going to talk today, I think, a little bit about stories, and I'd love to just start there. So, Mariana, I want to hand it over to you to introduce Lieutenant Governor and kick off with some questions as we dive in here.
Thank you so much, Joel, and welcome, Lieutenant Governor Duncan. I am so excited to have you on here, and I just have to say your book, GOP 2.0, was extremely a refreshing read for me, and I encourage all of our viewers to pick up a copy wherever they enjoy buying their books. So as Joel had mentioned, you know, a lot of us have stories when it comes to having to watch the party that they've loved and worked for so near and dear to their heart kind of retreat from their principles and values. So while most of our viewers may not have read your book, would you be able to tell us your story and what you experienced in the aftermath of the 2020 election when you stood by truth and principle and your conviction to ensure that no misinformation regarding any of the hoaxes or things that were being peddled by Donald Trump and his sycophants were being spread? If you wouldn't mind sharing your story with us, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, grateful to be here. Thanks for the opportunity and appreciate the kind words about the new book. I think an important part of my process of getting there, the post-election debacle, was kind of how I got into politics to start with, which I never grew up wanting to be in politics. I was a baseball guy. Professionally, I was a business entrepreneur, family-centered guy. So I got into politics because I just felt called to try to do something different. And so when I got in 2013, I just was driven by conservative principles, right? That's why I was there and thought they were the best way to kind of manage state government. And so when the whole debacle happened post-election, I voted for Donald Trump twice. I put it on the scale, and the scale just tipped Donald Trump's way more than it did Joe Biden's way, for sure. And so I voted for him. But honesty is the number one policy we should all have. And so when I watched the fallout of the blame game post-election, it just became very evident right out of the gates I was going to stand for honesty. And, quite honestly, I thought I was going to be part of a Republican choir. And it turned out I was really singing a solo for the most part on stage with a handful of other folks. And it was disconcerting. It was disorienting. Certainly, I'm trying to raise 3 kids right here. And this is my kitchen. I'm trying to raise 3 kids. And, it was very, very, very difficult period of time. But it was also reassuring that we were on the right track doing the right thing. And that's really that was the catalyst moment behind the book was, we can either sit or complain about the past or we can project the future. And I'm just, choosing to live in the future instead of the past.
I love that. And when you talk about the catalyst for the book, what was the aha moment? A lot of people, when they talk about writing books, it's this labor of love, but it's also something they don't ever want to have to do again because it's such a painful process. So when you think about the storyboard from the idea to the actual, like the fact that we're holding this in our hands, where was the moment where you're like, I need to put pen to paper and share this with the world to give us a roadmap?
So what's crazy is I just had this flashback. You just raised that book up. A year ago, sitting in this kitchen, I had no idea I was going to be an author. I had no idea that I was going to be on 100+ national television shows and have articles written almost every day about my direction for the Republican Party. So happened quickly. I actually started to sketch a plan of 2.0. It's really kind of what I've done as Lieutenant Governor here in Georgia. Is I've tried to lead the Senate because as the LG here in Georgia, I'm the president of the Senate. That's the majority of my job description. And I've really tried to lead with this honesty is the currency that I trade kind of mentality. And I've told every senator walking in the room when I got elected sworn in 2019, And so I've kind of lived out the 2.0 model here in Georgia, and really trying to figure out how to put that on display now is something that is encouraging. And the book, it's a love-hate relationship. It was tough. I've never written a book before. It was discouraging at some days, but it was really relatively easy with the content. And I just surrounded myself with people who had experience doing it and and what they kept saying is, tell us more, tell us more, tell us more, tell us more. And that was the culmination of the book. The opening, the prologue is this description of the rally that we went to the 2 days before the election. And a lot in the book is about my family and just kind of how raising my 3 kids helps shape kind of my ideals and my values. And my wife and I met in high school, so we've really grown up together. And that rally was so hard to explain to my kids, right? It was so hard to explain as to how Donald Trump's approach to winning an election is so different than Dad's approach to winning an election. That was the divergent moment when we got back in the car. And, because their dad would have spent the 47 minutes talking about all the great things that conservative values did for our country: a Supreme Court, or acceleration of a vaccine, a focus on a border, all of those things that really started to make sense, regulations around healthcare. But instead, it was kind of the reverse, the inverse. It was 3 minutes about all that and 44 minutes about, how bad, he disagreed with the rest of the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I want to pivot off of that, not pivot, but kind of dig a little deeper into that and explore some of those emotions. And I want to do this not to make you relive it, but because I think a lot of our viewers, listeners, supporters have lived a similar kind of experience where they've had to face these really tough moments of reckoning. I too am a conservative guy and have been my entire life. Marianne is going to share, I think, some stories about her grandparents, being poll workers. And there's these moments that are just so difficult to reckon with. And I'd like to hear from you on, how you're reckoning with it as you talk to fellow conservatives and Republicans. And then Marianne, I think, has some questions. But I wanted to read a quote. This is from page 44 in the book. I thought this was really just a poignant little bit here. A long list of people I formerly admired stood by quietly, tacitly supported the president's claims, or fanned the flames outright with more insinuation and misinformation. Sure, they were leaders in the president's Republican Party, but they had a higher duty to the truth, to the Constitution, and to all Americans. They didn't just represent Republicans. It distressed and saddened me to see my colleagues and fellow Republicans supporting what I'll call the most serious domestic attack on American democracy I've ever seen. With that depth of conviction, how do you talk to folks who just don't believe those words that I just read, who don't believe that the election was secure and accurate? How are you interacting with conservatives and Republicans, particularly those who remain very loyal to the president, in trying to cast this vision for GOP 2.0?
So I start with this premise, and I said this. I was in New Hampshire a couple of days last week, really starting to plant the seeds of a GOP 2.0, trying to set the expectations for the first in the nation primary process as to, look, you need to require these kind of tenets of who you end up selecting to be the Republican nominee. So I made this statement at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics: was leadership is lonely, but it's always worth it. And to me, I had that mindset early on. I knew that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the long-term strategy for Republican leadership to be back in control or back in charge would be through being honest about the election process. And so it was painful to watch those folks out there that and I don't know I don't have a truth meter when I talk to somebody, but I think an overwhelming majority of people don't actually believe the election was rigged genuinely. I don't think they believe that there was some sort of global conspiracy of epic proportion between 2 parties in 50 states and multiple nations that were so disciplined as to vote for 53.7% of Republican state senators in Georgia, but only 49.5% for a Republican president, right? I could go on. I don't think they believe that. I think it really is a story of, it feels like it's the path of least resistance to kind of maintaining control. But I talk about a term and towards the tail end of the book called creative grace, right? It sounds fancy and godly, but it really is just a strategy that I use. It's like, look, I know you're going to get there eventually, whether publicly or privately. But this is the right strategy forward. And I just give them a hall pass for now, but continue to stand up and tell the truth. A lot like probably what it felt like, 1,000 years ago when somebody was trying to convince people that the world wasn't really flat, right? It isn't really flat. It's round. And so that's what we need to take on as Republicans. Because the brutal realities are, as we're sitting here throwing arrows at each other as conservatives, maybe as a broader term, conservatives, we're watching the destruction of so many critical parts of our country's future with the train wreck called Joe Biden, right? We're allowing this to happen almost unimpeded because we're over here trying to fight about something that isn't even real. It's a mirage. We're basically arguing about a mirage and the color of it and the shape of it, but it's a mirage. It's not real.
Marianne, I'd love to hear your thoughts and maybe some insights on the supporters that we have that would say this isn't the way I want, and maybe get some feedback on that.
Sure thing, Joel. As you've mentioned, Lieutenant Governor, we're arguing over a mirage, and there's this kind of friction and faction within the GOP party right now. There's the people who are Trump supporters and are doubling down on Trumpism on a daily. And then you have other people who are being pushed out of the Republican Party for being more moderate. A portion of our supporters at Renew America, they've left the GOP and they believe that a third party is really the only way forward, and that the Republican Party is now the way of the Whigs. It is dead. It cannot be resuscitated. But how do you believe that we can reform the party, and how do you bring back people who are members, of the Republican Party that have long left and believe that, Trump is going to come back in 24. And if he doesn't, there's going to be a Trump likeness candidate on the ballot for the White House. How do you convince them that you can reform the GOP with GOP 2.0 instead of a viability of a third party?
Yeah, absolutely. So certainly, there's folks around the country that have talked to me about the third party. I'm not there. My approach is about trying to take back and heal the Republican Party. I think we're closer than maybe what it feels like on the surface from the conversations I'm literally having all over the country, including ones like this multiple times a day. I feel like if we can get back to putting policy over politics, that's where Republicans will win in masses. I can't do anything to please the outside 5%, right? They're either going to be with us or against us, but I can't run my policy shop. I can't aim my campaigns. I can't support people based on what I read on Twitter. Right? That's the outside 5%. Policy is where we're going to win. And the policy of going to get both the folks that are with us, lock, stock, 10 out of 10 issues with guns and freedom and liberty and limited government and national security, all those things. But also, I think there's this swath of regretful Biden voters that were out there that just couldn't stomach Donald Trump for a couple of reasons. One, because the rude, crude approach just didn't jive with the way that, they talk in their homes or in their businesses or in their communities. The other part, I think, that showed up in 16 to support Trump that I feel like walked away in 20 were those that were really bought into the drain the swamp mentality. Because, look, that was the greatest campaign slogan ever, right? It will probably go down in history as the greatest campaign slogan ever. But the realities of when you put that kind of to measure, he didn't drain the swamp. He fed the swamp. And those fiscal conservatives disappeared during the 2020 cycle that a lot of them populate the suburbs. So I think we win back the party by really focusing in on policies and trying to once again be the adult in the room, right? The weight of reality is going to be right. It always is. It just sometimes takes more time than others. I hope we're smart enough as a GOP to accept that reality before the 2024 cycle starts, or else we're going to come in second place again, and we're going to have to be under either Biden or somebody else's leadership from the Democratic Party, and continue to have no say-so in what we do in Afghanistan, on the southern border, with inflation, with gas prices, with crime, all those things that are big issues to us. We lead on policy. I think we've got a chance to take back America.
I love your optimism. And Joel, I want to actually just turn this point over to you to talk a little bit about our renewers and the way that we're working with this, and if there's any possible synergy, which I think that there is.
Yeah, well, and it's a time for us, as an organization. The way we've approached this is a little different than you, honestly, Lieutenant Governor, which is we have felt a real urgency around protecting the core institutions of democracy. And I personally have not changed any of my conservative positions. I see it more as what is most urgent at this moment. And so what we've decided to do is we are supporting Republicans and Democrats in the House who are very much, I would call them not necessarily moderate, because some of them are conservative on the Republican side. We are not supporting any far left progressives, but moderate Democrats, common sense Republicans and Democrats who have said we're willing to work together for the good of our institutions and our democracy. You mentioned a lot about working across the aisle as Lieutenant Governor. You've done a ton of that on very important issues. And so as we look at it, we're looking at democracy and institutions and as you point out very often, the importance of the integrity of our voting systems and holding those up. And so we just have made that choice that it's important at certain moments to work with people from the other party and in fact even support them. Now, are there regrets on that? Of course, some people have regrets on that. You mentioned Biden voters who regret that, and I would say that a lot of us are very concerned about the direction of our economy and our country. But I wonder how you think about that as you look forward in rebuilding a GOP that you would like to see in the ways that you lay it out. Where does working with Democrats fit into that in your mind?
Well, I am proud of our track record, both in the Senate as the president of the Senate and also as my 5 years in the House working with the other side of the aisle. I think it's our responsibility to try to work with those on the other side of the aisle. We can't just divide ourselves into two separate people when we're elected to represent. And so oftentimes but I do it with the ability to have a conservative slant on what ends up happening, right? Whether or not, like in the book, I talk a lot about immigration. I think we're going to have to work with the other side of the aisle on those big topics like immigration, right? We can't just talk about border security in half-throated terms like build the wall for 462 miles, but not really truly have a policy in place. And we also, in a parallel strategy, have to talk about the 16 million undocumented folks here. I think if we talk about, the Second Amendment, we talk in the book about this, conservative gun strategies, right? Gun policies. I have no seat at the table when I talk about my Second Amendment right now. I don't have the House, I don't have the Senate, I don't have the White House. And so we have to work with others and have to be willing to have those big conversations. And so I do think it's important. So somebody asked me the other day, they said, you ought to be done. This was on national TV. It was a big, scene. They said something like, Donald Trump's kicking you out of your own party. And my quick comment was, it's going to have to take somebody bigger and tougher than Donald Trump to kick me out of my party. I've been here a lot longer than he has. And so I am rooted in those GOP kind of principles. And I think those typically on a normal day, the best folks to sit in those elected offices, but knowing the reality is there are going to be folks on the other side of the aisle and they make us better, right? I think about one of the biggest legislative achievements I had was this rural healthcare bill. I created a tax credit for rural hospitals. And I used conversations with the other side of the aisle who started out voting against the idea. I said, look, that's okay, vote no, but tell me what you would do to improve it. By the time I got done, we had unanimous support. And it really is one of the reasons why I became Lieutenant Governor here in Georgia. So yes, there is value in the other side. There's also value in civility. I want to lead the conversation. The Democrats, look, they've got their own problems. I think there's many of those folks that watching the hard dive left that just feels like they're placating the outside 5% that are the noisiest, but maybe not the most represented. And so they certainly have their own issues and their own rhetoric. But I think if GOP 2.0 is done right, it makes both parties better because we're going to redefine the rules of engagement. We're going to once again be in that leadership position on the campaign trail, but also in those offices of influence, whether it be in the state legislatures, even in small rural communities or suburban communities, the way mayors run their cities and the way, Congress, shows up to work. GOP 2.0 is a game changer for both parties if executed correctly.
I love your enthusiasm for this, and I love your willingness to work across the aisle. In your book, you talk about empathy and tone as two key pillars for the GOP 2.0. One question that really struck me as I was reading this was, how is this possible to have these conversations, not across the aisle, but with other people within the Republican Party that aren't operating in the same set of facts and realities that the rest of us are?
So I talked a lot about this in New Hampshire last week because this question comes over and over and over again. Like, look, on paper, it looks like you're so far from actually having any sort of majority to back this up. Here's how the average conversation is going right now. I walk into the Capitol and somebody, elected officials in there, they look both ways, they make sure nobody can hear them, and they get real close and they're like, Geoff, I'm so proud of you. You're doing the right thing. Long term, this is the right strategy for our party. I just wish I had some more air cover from leadership, or I wish my district was a little more supportive. And I got two routes to take there. I can either shun them and embarrass them and shame them, or I can say, look, I encourage you, it's sooner than later to take this. I equated it to the story I gave in New Hampshire was, when I was a professional baseball player, I was late 90s. It was kind of the peak of steroid use. And my wife and I decided that I was not going to use steroids for a whole host of reasons. But one, it was not the right thing to do. But two, it felt like a short-term sugar high, right? It felt both short, a lot of guys were getting hurt very quickly. We knew the long-term effects of using steroids, but also this big notion that there was always going to be an asterisk mark next to my name, whether somebody knew about it or not, about what my career achievements were. And so I just opted never to use it. That feels a lot like these guys and girls around the country, or women that are trying to get elected or reelected, trying to embracing this conspiracy stuff, this divisive rancor that I'm just encouraging every room I walk into, recognize it for what it is. It's a short-term sugar high. It's not a long-term strategy to lead. And I'm encouraged that more and more people are coming into that fold. Now, look, when you get to 2024, whether it's Donald Trump or whether it's somebody that looks like Donald Trump and acts like Donald Trump, there's not going to be the support. We're at a high water mark right now. There's not going to be, I believe, a majority of support inside the Republican Party for what looks to be another second place finish to what is failed strategies happening in the White House every day. I mean, it's just painful to turn on the TV and watch kind of the Trump-Biden ticket forming against common sense conservatives. And that's really what's happening. The Trump-Biden ticket is actually forming to try to knock out folks that really care about limited government, that want to go lead the world and have a secure nation. I mean, we wake up today less stable in the Middle East than we've been in decades because of a quick, rash decision meant to try to placate a small group of liberals.
Well, I got to say, Geoff, I'm hearing similar things. I spend a lot of time talking to elected leaders, Republicans and otherwise, who are also, quietly and privately. It has been the unfortunate truth of the last couple of years. But also among, I'll just say, the donor class and business leaders. Business leaders, my goodness, they are very concerned, because what you have is not only some failed policies on the economic side, but then they'll put that on the Democrats and on progressives, and then they'll put this instability and this really insecurity on this kind of crazy far right conspiracy theorists, and there's real concern. I want to just go here for a minute around that. Not just economic insecurity, but this civil insecurity that I agree with you. It is a fringe group. It's probably even less than 5%. But unfortunately, we've seen over history a very small number of people with a very loud voice and very often some resolve and weapons can cause a lot of problems. And I know you share my love for Lincoln. I keep this selections of Lincoln's addresses from 1916. I want to read a quote from Lincoln that I'd love for you to respond to. And this is the tough stuff that a lot of our viewers are asking us, and why they're asking us to push on the democracy side. This is from an address in Springfield in 1837. So keep in mind when that is. Here's what Lincoln said. At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? And he's talking about our democracy. I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. This is a fairly prominent quote of Lincoln, who really said, and I think very prophetically knew, that our own weaknesses were our biggest threat, and these fringes were our biggest threat. What do you prescribe that we do about these agitators who are, whether you look at January 6th and just if you take all the politics out of it and just say the event of the day, these are things that are destabilizing. And how are you talking to folks, if you are engaging with folks who have these pretty radical ideas about how they think they should protect our country or push back? How are you dealing with that at a level of kind of personal conversations? And of course, you're probably dealing with that and seeing some folks who supported January 6th and otherwise. But how do you respond to that? And what do you think needs to be done?
So I rarely bump into anybody that thinks January 6th was a good idea or made sense or was civil. I know that we hear about it on TV from folks either trying to sell books or create shock and awe, or folks like, Donald Trump, who tries to talk out of both sides of his mouth to try to gain influence in larger crowds. I'm one of those that think leadership matters, and I get that from my business background. Right, a good leader absolutely makes a difference, and it can lead. I think back to you talk about Lincoln. I was in D.C. last week also, and my wife and I took some time to go walk around the Lincoln Memorial and just kind of spend a moment feeling the weight of his leadership. And I think back to when I was a kid starting to cut my teeth and grow up, and Reagan was the president, and just watching my parents' reaction to solid leadership. And I think leadership matters, and there's a vacuum of leadership of epic proportion in both parties all across the country. I think we are arriving at a point in time where leadership does matter and will matter in 2024, right? We're going to watch 22 play out in this massively chaotic, unexplainable series of elections. You're going to get some folks that win that you can't explain, that end up being more like Marjorie Taylor Greene than anybody else. Then you're going to get some folks that win over here or lose that you just can't explain. They've got a lifelong history of being conservative, of putting those things. They just don't believe in the big lie or aren't willing to lie about the big lie. And so I think we wake up in 24 cycle, and there's this overwhelming gravitation towards leadership. And that's what 2.0 is really all about, is trying to cultivate an environment, set the expectations amongst conservatives, those that may not even have voted for Trump, but it set that expectation for leadership. Because look, the brutal realities of this are, I said this on national TV on Sunday night, just came to my mind that we wouldn't pick Donald Trump or Joe Biden to lead any business in this country. Not one, right? They don't have the qualifications, the aptitude to lead a business, including a lemonade stand that one of our kids could set up and be effective at. But yet we picked them both in the last two cycles to represent us as our president. That's the brutal realities. I think there's a vacuum of leadership, and that's the void we're going to fill. And that's how we change the tide. We take away from that outside 5% that's using fear and lies and deception to try to influence the voting population. We take that away from them, and we put real leadership on display. Because at the end of the day, a majority of Americans really don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. They just need their problems solved, or they need their life. That mom that lives in the inner city needs better schools and safer streets. That small business owner needs less regulations in their pathway. They need a strong economy. They need a workforce that's trained and ready. There's lots of opportunities to put that type of leadership on display.
Well, I agree with you. And again, like Mariana, love your optimism. I want to push a little bit. You mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I actually do interact with quite a few folks who do believe that January 6th was absolutely necessary. In fact, I make it a point to remain friends with a lot of my friends who believe that, because I think it's important that we don't break friendships and relationships. Some of my own family and some of my customers at our little retail store here in Florida. And what I've found is an inability to have a conversation, and ultimately I've had to just avoid the conversation. And I've tried to engage. So I'm just curious, as you get to some folks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is obviously supportive of what happened on January 6th and has said so many times, when you come face to face with either supporters of hers or those in your state as you're out on the road, what are you doing, and how are you engaging that conversation? And I'm asking, at a relational level, genuinely, because I'm out here like a lot of our listeners and viewers, just trying to navigate that. We want to bring that civility. We want to bring that unity and that tone with us into these conversations. But again, in a complete disconnection from reality and unwillingness to talk about these things. I'm just curious if you got any tips for us.
Yeah. So great point. I write about this towards the tail end of the book a little bit about January 6th and the average person that showed up, not everybody, but the average cumulative profile of the person that showed up on January 6th was kind of a subset of Americans that were least affected positively by Trump's policies. right? A majority of those folks that showed up on January 6th were just as disenfranchised from kind of the world or the American dream as they were before he got there. They just felt like he was fighting, right? And they're drawn towards the fight. Marjorie Taylor Greene fights, right? I think GOP 2.0 has to embrace the word fight, but fight with a purpose, right? We got to just, instead of just going to 280 characters on Twitter and picking a fight with somebody, we got to fight for better education. We got to fight for better jobs, better public safety. We got to fight for law enforcement in those communities to be able to have the resources necessary to protect folks. We're watching it play out here in the city of Atlanta in epic proportion. Our city almost feels shut down at times because of how bad the spree of crime is, because of a lack of support for law enforcement. We need to have those areas of opportunities where I think those folks that were gravitated towards the fight, we now angle that towards fighting with a purpose. And so my encouragement is, look, you can't, it's not just enough to complain, you got to actually get something done. And to me, that does grab people's attention, but it's going to take time. What I'm watching Marjorie Taylor Greene doing, she's doing nothing for the state of Georgia, right? Nothing. She's not bringing any more jobs here. She's not bringing any better education. There's no budget dollars that she's able to stand up for. She's alienating us. In fact, she's creating a pocket. And look, I got to be honest with you, I'm probably more conservative than Marjorie Taylor Greene is. Like, I'll put my voting record on display when I was in the House. But just because you're conservative doesn't mean you're angry. Just because you're angry doesn't mean you're conservative. We've got to break that disconnect. And that's the one-on-one relationship building that I think we have to do a better job of as conservatives is making sure we disconnect angry from conservative. Because, you know, I want to attract moderates to our tent because we need them, right? That's how we win. But I think I attract them better, not by adjusting my policies and alienating myself from folks that are hardcore conservatives. I do it more with my tone. I'm inviting. I look at somebody that's with me on 7 out of 10 issues or 8 out of 10, going back to Reagan's quote that we used a couple of times they're not a traitor. They're not a 20% traitor. They're an 80% friend. And until we get back to that mentality, we're never going to legitimately grow the size of the tent, whether it be demographics or geography or social disconnects. We're going to have to grow the tent by looking to each other, agreeing to disagree on some stuff.
How do you get them to turn out? So we have the GOP 2.0 roadmap. We're ready to go. We're locked and loaded. How do we get them to turn out on election day? As you pointed out in your book, as we saw just across the nation, specifically in Georgia with the January 5th Senate runoff, voters didn't show up. Republicans stayed home because they felt their vote didn't count because of this peddling of a fraud hoax and all these other crazy things that were coming out of the 2020 cycle. How do you encourage them in the next election to show up to vote?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We lost 2 U.S. Senate seats here in Georgia and also lost the majority nationally in the Senate because 400,000 Republicans did not show back up in the runoff, right? Because Donald Trump specifically told them their vote didn't count, don't bother, don't show up. And we're certainly seeing some of that play out again. He came down here and spit in the face of every Republican and said, vote for Stacey Abrams over Brian Kemp, who is on paper and in person the most conservative governor in our state's history. So we get them to turn back out in 3 different channels. I think there's some folks that are like me that just believe beyond a shadow of a doubt, better policies, more empathy, and a better tone are the absolute lock, stock approach to winning again. Then there's going to be some folks who show up in a lane that just like, you got to use a better tone, right? Like I talk about like my mom's friends, right? They're all those, man, we love Donald Trump, but I just wish he'd put that phone down, right? That group of folks. The other folks are going to get there reluctantly, but they're just going to be tired of losing. They're going to get tired of supporting really solid, you know, whether it be mayors or city council members or congressmen that didn't win, and they should have won, and all because they didn't take the bait on the big lie. Those are the 3 lanes that I think show up in 2024. And if we don't, we get a great second place trophy again, and that does us absolutely no good.
So as you look at 2024, you know, obviously you're out there, you're in New Hampshire. We saw that you've been asked about 2024, and we won't put you on the spot on that. But I do wonder a little bit of inside baseball, because our viewers love this. What kinds of things are you seeing happening at a real tactical level to try to change what happens coming out of the Republican Party in 24. I mean, there is obviously tremendous cross pressure anytime, as long as Trump's name is in the mix. That pretty much freezes, I would say, almost everybody, other than suicide missions. As we saw in 2020, we saw a few people jump in there, in the primary trying to beat him. But what is the strategy? Talk to us to the level that you're comfortable. What can be done between now and 2024 to ensure, for those who believe, like you said, that another Trump run is just another second place trophy? What needs to happen to set that up for, let's just call it a healthy primary, where ideas and great candidates get into a primary and they compete with each other, as opposed to Trump jumps in, he sucks up all the oxygen and that's it.
Yeah, I don't think Trump's attracted to leadership. He's attracted to the limelight. And that's what's got him playing this game right now of trying to act like either A, he's going to be a kingmaker, or B, he thinks he's going to be president again. The reality is he's got 0% chance of ever being the president again, right? It just, between history and daily self-inflicted wounds that continue to make it harder and harder to justify putting your stamp of approval on that brand of conservatism. And so with the distance of time and continued self-inflicted wounds, you're going to watch people wanting to walk away from him. But, you got this whole crop of elected officials that just didn't really have the gall to come out and call it what it was. And it was a big lie. It wasn't any sort of grand conspiracy. And so you got that whole crop of folks that, I think are going to be branded that way for now until the end of kind of this kind of current era of politicians. And then you got the other folks that are out there trying to thread the needle and trying to placate both sides. I just genuinely think that leadership is going to matter. I think when we wake up and the dust settles here and we kind of put on the scale how bad Joe Biden is and how bad we need to win as Republicans, that we're going to try to pick up the pieces and really try to identify this crop of folks that are really calling it for what it is. And that's a vacuum of leadership inside the party. And I appreciate the things that Donald Trump did well. I don't appreciate the things he didn't do well, but that's leadership, right? That's, I don't agree with my wife on 100% of the stuff that she decides on, and obviously vice versa. But I think you're going to see a crop of leadership, and that's really the thrust behind. And I think the quick momentum that GOP 2.0 has gotten, the request to speak all over the country, the request for the book, to be in New Hampshire, to be in South Carolina, to be in DC, trying to vision cast. Because right now, if you're a common sense conservative, there's no safe place to call home in the Republican Party, right? You're shunned if you don't believe in a big lie. And you certainly don't have the gall to go to the other side of the aisle and kind of wave the flag that you disagree with. So 2.0 is quickly becoming this safe place to call home for this whole swath of tens of millions of common sense conservatives, to where hopefully we have enough of a tailwind to where that becomes, the filter for that primary process, where folks are like, look, I'm a card-carrying member of 2.0, and this is my brand of conservatism, and this is how I'm going to be Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Well, I have to use this opportunity to plug Renew America. We're trying to be a gathering place without the baggage of being called a party, and we're seeing that. I mean, it's one of the reasons we were excited to have you on, because we want to welcome folks who feel that way, that feel, hey, I'm not ready to leave the Republican Party, but we've got to do something different. And where do I put my energy? Where do I put my money? Where do I put my time? And, so we're seeing, for example, a lot of grassroots Republicans joining our group, and maybe they won't campaign for the Democrats. Sometimes they will, because they think they're the better leader, which I think is a good reason to. But we've got plenty of Republicans who we think are principled Republicans that we're supporting, and, like yourself, and we're eager to bring those folks in the tent. So yeah. I think creating those spaces is important.
And to that, one of the encouraging things for me is, look, to do all this big, heavy lifting that we know we've got to do, we've got to be unselfish, right? So we can't have just singularly focused ideas. I'm just one cog in the wheel of reform inside the party, and we need to make sure that we continue to have, a grassroots kind of groundswell of expectations that get set. And one of the things that encourages me is I log on in the morning and my team kind of prepares a summary document of what the previous day's success metrics are. And one is where we got fundraising dollars. And it's so fascinating to watch people I've never met before that have seen a clip or read an article or saw me on TV or watched a podcast like this. And they put $50, $100, $500 that just shows up from states all over the country. Folks who are joining the movement at GOP2.org, literally logging on with no marketing dollars behind it, navigating to a GOP 2.0 and saying, I want to join the movement. Here's my name. Here's my email address. Here's my state. Plug me in. That's encouraging to me. And yes, do we have 74 million people yet? Nope, but we're headed there.
I love that. And I just have one final question, and then I'm going to kick it over to Joel after I get your answer on this, Lieutenant Governor.
Oh, sounds like a drum beater.
Yeah, it's a little bit. So my grandparents were, God rest their souls, committed Republicans. And every election, you could count on seeing them at the local polls as poll workers. And I can remember that as, gosh, way back from when I was a little girl. And while they're no longer here, they're not an anomaly when it comes to being civically engaged. But they've seen the Republican Party, and I think to this day, if they saw the Republican Party, they would say it's a shell of themselves. And to them, they may feel that all hope is lost. I know they're not alone in that. But how do we bring Republicans back and show them that the better days of the GOP are ahead and not, in fact, behind us?
Yeah, I think we have to start kind of reversing the pet project that I talk about in the book, Policy, Empathy, and Tone. We got to kind of reverse order it. We got to start with our tone. We got to practice what we preach. One of the things that happened to me that I talk a lot about in the book is Donald Trump went directly after me as a person. When I was on TV, not doing anything other than just saying fact-based truths that, there was no systemic fraud. Nobody has turned in any sort of evidence that made any sense at all in the state of Georgia. I got tweeted at directly, and my response was my first step in trying to put the pet project on display. I could have come back to him and called him every name in the book and gotten 1 million retweets, and I would have been the Twitter star for 8 minutes. But my measured response, because my kids were sitting here at this kitchen table here talking about what we would do as a response, was to thank him for his conservative leadership and to invite him to help us reelect Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, which he did not do. We start with tone. Tone matters, and that's what separates us as Republicans, is our common sense conservative approach, because we don't have to scream about our ideas because they're that good. One of the first stories I talk about in the book is that rally in Rome, Georgia. And I knew we had a problem 2 days before the election for a number of reasons, right? All the sirens were going off. But one in particular was when I closed my comments in front of that sea of Make America Great hats, 30,000 of them. I said something as bold and crazy as this: our policies are so good as Republicans, they even help the people that don't vote for us. And I got booed. And that told me we had a problem, because we ought to own that as Republicans. We ought to be proud. It ought to be a badge of honor that we're so good and thoughtful with our policies, they help the people that don't vote for us. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the number one strategy in trying to get those folks back to recognizing their party.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, thank you so much for being with us. I'll give you your shameless plug. Pick up the book, GOP 2.0. There it is.
Wow, double fisted. Thank you.
That's right. We both read it. And you want to give us the website again so folks can make sure they go there?
Yeah, go to gop2.org. Check out kind of our latest news stories going on. But also you can go to Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, in person, online. It's available everywhere.
Great. Well, and of course, we want to encourage our viewers to make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Maybe we'll have TikTok soon. I think Marianne is angling for that. But follow us and help us to reclaim this country for good. Lieutenant Governor, thank you for standing up for truth in a very difficult time in Georgia. You stood out as a bright light, and we very much appreciate it. And we're hoping that our viewers will check out your book and the website, and onward for the good. So from everyone here at Renew America, thank you all for being with us today.
Thank you.